Good morning, everyone. My name's Tammy Smalley. I'm the Head of Conservation for Lincolnshire Wildlife Trust, and I sit on the Executive Board for the Humberhead Levels Partnership. I'm going to introduce the policy context to our environmental land management scheme, and then we'll have a series of three panel members presenting on various topics, and then we'll have an open question and answer session, followed by, after that session, I will go into the detail of what the test is aiming to do. We are recording this presentation, and those of us who aren't so IT challenged as me will work out how to make that recording available on the YouTube channel that we have, and we will circulate it to people. Right, so I always believe people should know who you are. So I started with the Wildlife Trust back in 2016. It's worth noting that my mother did use a bowl back in the 70s and put it on my head. On this particular occasion, I ended up with a fringe. I worked for Natural England nationally on marine designation programme and offshore developments for 7 years. And some of you may remember me. I know we're in the Humberhead levels, but I did come up to the Humber to discuss things from the days when I was the Wash Estuary Project Officer, working with the farming community in the fens down there. I've worked in the private sector for the environmental consultancy, and importantly, I've actually cut my teeth in farming. I have graded Brussels sprouts and cut collies. It's part of a rite of passage from my era in Lincolnshire because I am a true yellow belly. Who are the Humberhead Levels Partnership? Well, basically involves some of the local planning authorities, Doncaster, East Riding of Yorkshire and North Lincolnshire, plus various organisations such as English Heritage, Environment Agency, the various drainage boards, the National Farmers Union, Natural England, and our fellow environmental NGO, the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds, and our sister wildlife trusts in Nottinghamshire and Yorkshire, because the Humberhead Levels cuts across 3 counties. What do we hope to do? Well, we hope to promote and recover nature. Whilst doing that, we will support people in regards to securing a green economy, and particularly around land management and providing land management advice, so that the nature reserves that exist within the Humberhead Levels are not islands but are connected. We have been working with communities for over 10 years. The Humberhead Levels Partnership were in existence before they became a natural improvement area, which was before my time. And we aim to be an effective partnership delivery, and we have been so far. And why are we doing that? Well, there has been much in the news around the climate change and biodiversity crises. This particular report by the Natural History Museum looked at various scientific literature from across the world and estimated that 40% of all insects are in decline, and many are endangered, over a third. So when you think about the Humberhead Levels and what we could do, we could create insect highways. And one example of a previous work programme we had across the Humberhead Levels was creating grasslands for pollinators. This was a national pilot for the Nature Recovery Network programme that is being developed currently. So nature's recovery at a landscape scale. Sir John Lawton first published a report, Making Space for Nature, back in 2010, which led to a government white paper. The basics are bigger, better, more joined up. And this has had led to a 25-year environment plan being delivered by the government back in 2018, where it clearly states nature is in trouble. The ecosystem services that we are all reliant on to deliver food, water, clean air, need attention, recognising the need for soils protection and enhancement, and much more. This was a seminal piece of policy that the government published. And within that policy, it clearly sets out the need to manage land sustainably, including ensuring environmental net gain. This is where you first hear the term environmental land management scheme. It talks about soils and particularly relevantly to the Humberhead levels, peatlands, and sets out various strategies around woodland and flood and coastal risk management. It also says we have to recover nature, not just protect, but recover nature. And we need to think at a landscape scale and think of the beautiful landscapes of our green and pleasant land. And as part of that, we need to connect people with the environment around them for their benefits as well as for ours. We need to be more wiser in how we use natural resources and reduce any impacts we have in regards to pollution and waste. And of course, we are an island. So the 25-year environment plan sets out various policy around the marine environment. And this government continued to want to be a world leader in tackling the climate change and biodiversity crises, and they set out some policies around that within the 25-year plan. This all led to a discussion around the need for, particularly as we left the European Union, legislation. And that legislation includes the Environment Bill. Now, COVID has had many impacts on many of us. And the Environment Bill is no different. It was going through the readings in the House of Commons, and it was due to go into the House of Lords earlier this year, but that had to be delayed due to the full lockdown coming into place for the third time this year. It is hoped that the bill will be reintroduced in autumn session. The government have said that will be the case, and that it will gain royal assent by the end of this calendar year. The Environment Bill will set or provide the framework for setting legally binding targets in regards to various environmental principles, and they will be based around water, air, waste, and the natural environment. It enables the creation of a new government body that will act as, for want of a term, a watchdog to make sure the public bodies across England particularly deliver against that. And it also will introduce something called biodiversity net gain. Mandatory biodiversity net gain will have to be taken into account for various planning and development control work that many of us are involved with, and offers an opportunity for where sites cannot deliver that biodiversity net gain on sites to land managers in the locale to deliver that biodiversity net gain. What did manage to get royal assent towards the end of last year was the Fisheries Act for the offshore element, but also the Agricultural Act. And this is where we saw for the first time the basic framework for environmental sustainable land management. It goes into a lot of detail, and we will pick this up as a topic further on in the agenda today. I think I've probably come in a bit early, but there we go. We will now stop me speaking. And Jim, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Excellent. So Jim Egan joins us from King's. He previously worked on the Allerton project, and he's going to talk to us today about natural capital. Thanks, Jim. I'm going to turn myself off and hand over to you, Matt.
Thank you very much, Tammy. I'll just get my slideshow up and running. Right then, good morning, everybody. My name is Jim Egan. Thank you for the introduction, Tammy. I work for King's Crops as a technical advisor across the Midlands. Tammy, you said we all needed to say where we came from, so I better do a bit of a pen picture. I used to work at the Allerton project. I spent 8 years working there on the research farm in Leicestershire. Prior to that, I worked for the Farming and Wildlife Advisory Group, and quite a long time ago now, I was a mining engineer, and I spent the first 20 years of my working life digging coal underground in Nottinghamshire. I've got quite a varied background, and I think what I'm going to talk about today is public goods and natural capital, but trying to bring a practical aspect to it and look at how it can impact on your farm business, what you can do to make it beneficial and work for you, and just see the steps that you can take to start to take advantage of what I genuinely believe are some really fantastic opportunities facing the farming industry in the near to middle and long-term future. So the first few slides, I'm actually going to go into some policy speak and actually try and unravel what things mean. And then we'll have a quick look at maybe looking at sensibly what it looks like on farm. So what are public goods? Well, the concept of public goods provides a means of describing the environmental and social goods and services from agriculture and forestry that are not delivered through the market. It's that stuff you don't get paid for. It's that stuff that gets delivered while farmers are producing food and running a business. So it's farm wildlife. It's the sorts of thing that Tammy's already referenced. It's about pollinators, it's about insects, it's about birds. It's about stuff that lives on farmland and, for want of better words, lives and dies by how the farm is run. There's cultural landscapes. So we mustn't underestimate the value of a landscape. And all the landscapes are very different. So the landscapes across the Humberhead levels will be very different to the landscape on the Lincolnshire Wolds. But that landscape is specific. You could land yourself somewhere, and if you're familiar with that landscape, you'd know if you were in the Humberhead levels or if someone had taken you up on the Wolds. It's a sense of place. And that really is dictated by farmland and how the land is farmed. It's about delivering high quality air, water and soil. You hear lots about that, and later on through the presentation, I'll just take a couple of minutes to look at how that can actually impact and benefit the farm business. We hear lots now at the moment about climate change and resilience to flooding and all that sort of stuff. They're all public goods. They're all stuff that you can deliver through a farmed environment while still producing food. And my own personal view, and lots of the views in this today are my own, are that that's a massive opportunity for farming, and it isn't something we should be frightened of as an agriculture industry. So similar process, what's natural capital? Well, again, I've taken some words from the 25-year plan, which Tammy's already referenced, and I'm going to read them, but it says natural capital is the sum of our ecosystems, species, freshwater, land, soils, mineral, our air and our seas. These are all elements of nature that either directly or indirectly bring value to people in the country at large. And they do this in many ways, but chiefly by providing us with food. So there's a key bit in there, and it repeats that stuff about clean air, water, wildlife, wood, recreation, So it's talking again about the public goods and what they actually deliver. But it's quite wordy, it's quite big. What is it? What does that actually mean to where we are? So when you're looking at assessing it, again, this comes from the 25-year plan. So there are 3 main steps to any natural capital assessment. The creation of an asset register for a site that describes the extent and type of the habitat. I'm going to come back to this in the next few slides, but I think that's really, really important. You wouldn't run a farming business without an asset register. You know what your fixed costs are, you know what your machinery costs are, you know what machines you've got, you know their value. So why would you not have a natural capital asset register? When you think of it in that way, to me, it makes complete sense. You might not yet be able to put a value to it, but what have you got? It's really important. I've been involved in a project with Nestle, with some dairy farmers in Cumbria for a few years now. And as ever, the scream, the shout from the corporate was, we want to get people to change. And my mantra was, well, hang on a minute, before we get them to change, let's understand what they've got. And the corporate was really, really surprised that the 100 and odd farmers that we were working with had over 220 kilometres of hedgerow. They had over 100 kilometres of stone wall. So you start to look at that, and that's that group's natural capital asset register. So actually really getting to grips with this and understanding what you've got and putting it in plain and simple language is quite an important thing to do. And I will repeat that several times through the next 10 or 15 minutes. You get into the big words again here. The estimation of the level of ecosystem services provided by that natural capital, the physical flow, and the monetary valuation of the benefits provided by the ecosystem services, which is the monetary flow. But it's all good, highfalutin words, but what does it actually mean? There have been people talking about public goods and natural capital and all trading all these things for a long, long time now. And it seems to be very slow to get that market moving. And I've got some views about why, and I've got some views about how, as farmers, we can actually help unblock it and start to make that natural capital asset actually mean something on farm. So what does it mean on farm? Well, let's have a quick look and see. What are your natural capital assets? We'll just have a quick look and see a few. Hedgerows. They're probably one of the most controversial things on a farm. If you ask a farmer meeting what's the best way to manage a hedge, if you let it go for a while, that meeting, once people have started talking, you'll be in there for 2 or 3 hours. Go and ask an environmental body how farmers should manage a hedge. You've been there for even longer. And nobody agrees. But the most important thing is we need to value them. They deliver that landscape. You remember when we were talking about public goods, it was cultural landscape value. And they're different everywhere. Where I live in Nottinghamshire, I live on in the Nottinghamshire Sandlands, a lot of it's enclosure land. The hedgerows are predominantly hawthorn. They're predominantly A-shape. That's very different to if I was to drive across to Leicestershire and go back to the Allerton project, where they're predominantly mixed hedges. They're taller, they're bigger, they're wider. That's different again to the hedges on the top of the Lincolnshire Wolds. That's different again to the hedges that sit in the Humberhead levels. So they are specific to the place, but they have a natural capital value. They deliver for pollinators. So they deliver for farm wildlife. They're nesting habitat for birds. They're overwintering habitats for pollinators. They're nest sites for butterflies and moths. They're really, really important. So that's 2 of the public goods they deliver. They deliver on air quality. They deliver against soil erosion. They stop erosion if they're placed in the right place on the slope. It's amazing when you go and look at old hedge lines in a field that's been split, a lot of you will crop differently on either side of that old hedge line. It's there for a reason. They can protect water quality because they help prevent erosion. They can contribute towards climate change and resilience against flooding. They are a real natural capital asset. From a farming perspective, sometimes they can be a pain. They get in the way. They shade things out. You never get paid enough for them in a countryside stewardship scheme for managing them. But what natural capital does, it could put a bigger value to them. There might be somebody out there who really wants that value. Tammy spoke about making networks. Hedgerows are great for making networks and connecting corridors. So start off by measuring how many hedges you've got on the farm, the length of them, add it up, put a condition assessment to them, say whether you think they're good, bad or indifferent. Actually work out how much hedgerow can be gapped up. That starts to build your natural capital assets on farm. Stone walls would be another one. Think about going up into the Peak District in Derbyshire. Those stone walls actually frame that landscape. They make it what it is. So they do the landscape bit. They don't do that much for climate change and resilience, but they do stuff for soil. They can help prevent erosion. They can help prevent erosion for water quality purposes, and they can be great for farm wildlife. They provide shelter. The nooks and crannies have all sorts of lichens and mosses in. Birds nest in them. They have a great natural capital asset. In places like the Humberhead levels, you can add ditches and dikes to that. Not only are they really, really important for keeping the water level right, for helping managing water levels on farms, preventing flooding, they're wildlife corridors. They are natural capital assets. They've got a value. What species-rich grassland, so permanent grass fields, they've got a natural capital asset and value. They're not just an encumbrance on an arable farm, they've got a value to something. Tammy mentioned about grassland for pollinators. They're really important. Think about woodlands. It's not just about the trees in a woodland. 30% of a woodland should be open space to let wildlife use it. So what's its condition? How much of it have you got? The list can go on and on and on. You can add in ponds, you can add in streams, you can add in field margins. But how many of you actually know what natural capital assets you've got on the farm? It might not seem like a lot, but if you club together in a bigger group, all of a sudden you've got a large natural capital asset. Who knows about it? That can be your shop window. By coming together and saying to people, we've got all of these assets on here, how would you like to help us manage them? It's a different way of looking about how you might get the funding in. And then you can start to look at what's the natural capital potential on the farm. So you've created your register, you've created your list. You don't need to spend thousands and thousands of pounds on this thing. Lots of people like Kings and working with Frontier, we've created a system. It's part of our soil management, online management digital platform. You can now actually record all your natural capital and you can put a value to it. You can assess what condition it's in. You can draw the map online and save it. It totals up everything you've got. So you could work with some neighbours and bring it together. And then it comes to the potential. What's the potential natural capital? This is where, in my words, you can do something different. So how many times have we seen farmland like that? As advisors and as farmers. Yes, we know you've got to produce food. Yes, we know you have to run a profitable business. But how long does it take to get between those telegraph poles and that fence? How difficult is it for the sprayer operator to work up and down there? How difficult is it to cultivate? And what is the yield return from that block of land? For me, that becomes natural capital potential. Because if you start to look hard at that and those types of areas, I'm betting if you take everything into account, you're probably not making much money from it. Then you can start to use things like satellite imagery and yield data to really focus in on what are the productive areas of your farm. You look at the map here, this is for some biomass imagery on a field. And we're starting to understand now that by taking biomass imagery, so looking at the greenness, the colour of the crop, if we're looking at that in May, June time, we can very, very confidently assess yields now. So these areas of low biomass, which are the red and orange areas down here around the field boundaries and in these corners, they are going to be low yielding areas. So take a look at your yield mapping or your biomass imagery for 4 or 5 years. Go and have a look and see what is wrong in that corner. is there something I can do to make it better? Can I do something with soil? Can I add nutrients? Can I make it productive? 9 times out of 10, the answer will be no. So what can I do with it? Well, that could be your natural capital potential. That could be where you manage for pollinators. And by managing for pollinators in some of these field boundaries, you could actually be reducing your on-farm costs. You could be reducing the need for an insecticide. You could be enhancing pollinators. So it does a whole host of different things. So if you did take some of those areas out, all of a sudden you've created a pollinator habitat. You can get paid for that through countryside stewardship, but I don't think the time's that far away where you might be able to trade that natural capital potential, and somebody other than government may well pay for those pollinator strips. We're involved in a project called LENS, the Landscape Enhancement Network Scheme, which is running in, the one we're involved in is running in East Anglia. And that's where 4 commercial companies have come together, identified a landscape and said what they're prepared to pay for. And that does include provision of pollinator habitat. So by actually identifying the areas of your natural capital potential, you're looking at potential income stream revenue. And that may well come from the Environmental Land Management Scheme when it launches. It might come now from countryside stewardship. It's a payment. So it is a payment for a natural capital, or as I've said, I think that might start to come from commercial sources in the not too distant future. So we've looked a little bit at natural capital potential in terms of land management, but it isn't just restricted to land. Soil is natural capital. So you've got natural capital potential in improving how you manage your soil. That may well actually improve yield. It may actually improve your business return. But while you're doing that, you can be delivering natural capital. You can be delivering for biodiversity. You can be delivering for wildlife. Because by improving your soil, you start to improve water quality. You start to improve air quality. The plants and the crops that grow there use and utilize more of the available nutrient rather than it going into a watercourse. This is when I used to work at the Allerton project. It's a field ready for spring drilling, and it's after a heavy rainfall event. Same field, 2 years later, similar rainfall event, ready for spring drilling, but there was a cover crop in place. We've actually stopped that soil erosion going into the water. We've improved water quality. But what we're also understanding about cover cropping and using continuous cover over the land is that will soak up any nutrient. It can help prevent leaching, and it can make those nutrients available for your following crop, and therefore reduce your inputs and your bills. There's no perfect solution. There's no one size fits all, but taking this approach can work. And then you can start to think about how can I manage the soil differently and what other things can I do? So can you bring in grass lazing to assist into your arable system? That's natural capital potential for me. That's not always easy to do in a non-livestock area or on a complete arable farm. But actually, if you're battling against grass weeds like blackgrass and resistant ryegrass, sometimes the cost of dealing with those outweighs the return you might get from a conventional crop. So is it worth putting a 2-year grass laying? Is it worth improving the soil and ensuring you get rid of that grass weed? That will improve air quality, it will improve soil quality, improve water. It's natural, it's delivering natural capital. And again, the project we're working with in East Anglia, those commercial concerns that are involved in that project are prepared to pay farmers to take this type of action. They want to see less of the chemical used to control blackgrass reaching watercourses. So it's cleaning water, it's natural capital potential, it's a way of trading. So it's already happening in many ways. So I hope that gives you a flavour of what you can do. And when you look at all the language that sits around it, it's the same as it was when I started doing this type of work 20 years ago. Used to go on farm and deliver the old countryside stewardship, and you used to map the habitats. Well, that was creating a natural capital asset register. It was mapping the habitats. It's just things in a different wrapper. It's like they've called the old marathon bar of Snickers, or they've called Opal Fruit Starburst. We've now called Habitat Natural Capital. It's the same stuff. It's quite basic. You can't change the nuts and bolts of what's on a farm. It's just looking at it with a different pair of eyes. So I thought I'd like to finish with just a few thoughts about how does all that improve the environment. So what does the farmed environment, what is wildlife, what does it actually need? So research demonstrates that if between 3 and 5% of farmland was managed for the environment, we would actually deliver all of those things. We deliver nesting and breeding habitat. We deliver summer feeding and insects. We deliver overwintering habitat and hibernation. We deliver winter food. We provide connectivity, those corridors that Tammy spoke about, and we protect watercourses. And for those of you who are farmers out there, even with flat, square fields on really productive soil, I'll challenge you. At least 3 to 5% of your land is not delivering you a really good, effective and efficient financial return. And I genuinely believe that's the case over nearly all of lowland England. I think it's nearer 7 to 10%. That's where your natural capital potential comes in. So that's where you can do things differently. But one of the core things that underpins all of this is you need that healthy functioning soil, and you have to have a profitable farm business. None of this runs on fresh air. We still need food. So it's unlocking those mechanisms where you can be properly rewarded for that natural capital and that potential. But you can't be rewarded if you haven't put it in a shop window. So actually by creating your register, by coming together as a group of you and being in a position to say to a water company, to an industrial company that wants to offset some of their corporate social responsibility, to be there to say to planners, we can help you. You can, if you help us restore these hedges, you can make our 200 kilometres of hedges 300. They mightn't have that need for offset, but until you've got that shop window and you do it yourselves, you're not in the position to take advantage of it and start to deliver what the environment needs. Final slide really from me is, does that work on a farming scale? Yes, it does. One or two of you might have seen me use this slide before. It's about a project run at Hillsdon by the Centre of Ecology and Hydrology, and they did a 6-year experiment. They took a 1,000-hectare commercial farming unit and they removed between 3 and 8% of low-yielding land. They split the farm into 6 blocks, and in each block they took out what the farm manager thought was low-yielding, and they created beneficial habitats. This is where it's not just about pollinators, so don't forget, we think about predators. So some of those pollinator habitats will provide habitat for beneficial predators. So you can start to deal with aphids and slugs in a different way. It won't eliminate your need for insecticides or for using slug pellets, but it can reduce your reliance on them. When they did that, they saw an increase in some crop yields of up to 35% with no net loss of yield or for others. Now, there's some tricks in figures with that because you've taken some land out, so your actual crop return increases on a smaller area of land. But the key thing for me is none of those farmed areas lost money by taking that land out. So if you take that land out and then get a payment for it, either through things like countryside stewardship or the environmental land management scheme, or by trading it as natural capital potential, you can't lose as a farm business. So what do I think the next steps are for farmers? Start to build a natural capital asset register. Identify your natural capital potential, be ready for the opportunities. That opportunity might be as simple as going into countryside stewardship this year or next. Look to work together, create a shop window, actually understand what you've got. Don't be afraid of working with your neighbours. Most of you do anyway. Take advantage of existing opportunities. That's where things like stewardship come in now. If you're not in a scheme, get in one. Get used to delivering this type of work. And explore future opportunities and take advantage of change that's coming. It is scary. The reduction in BPS is not fun for anybody. It's really serious for farming businesses. But there are some opportunities out there. And I think I genuinely believe by working together between yourselves, you don't always need experts to guide you through this. You need some help. But a lot of this you can do yourself by just looking and seeing what you've got and maybe using a different pair of eyes. That's me done, Tammy. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jim. We're going to have a chat because John's not here yet.
He promised he'd be here.
Yeah, but he had other. Morning, everyone. John, who's our next speaker, basically had other meetings that he had to fit this around, and same with James, because we're all busy people. He'll be with us in a minute. So as part of this test, and I'll be giving information later on more detail to it, we're going to be looking, Jim, at what DEFRA call the peri-urban environment and the potential for land management scheme there. Is this a term that people know, and what's your opinion? So if you think about, so I'll use Doncaster because it's part of the Humberhead levels. It's the land immediately adjacent to any of the housing or business estates. That's classified as peri-urban. And I presume they're thinking about public green access space and other things. Do you think there are potential for working in that area more? Or do you think?
Yes. I personally think there is potential for working in there. If you ask farmers I've never heard of peri-urban before, but if you ask farmers on the outskirts of Doncaster what their biggest problem is, for them, it will be, as they see it, people trespassing, it will be litter, it will be people not respecting what they do, their crops and their food. But actually, those areas are huge in natural capital potential. So for me, it's that usual thing, it's bringing people together so that you can maximise the most out of it. The principles are exactly the same. Terminology should be exactly the same. So yes, it can. I think it can work. The principle can work anywhere. It's about creating groups, bringing people together to talk openly and stripping away some of the language.
Yeah, grand. And Jim, you are off the hook because John has arrived.
Thank you.
Brilliant.
I'll switch my video off.
Thank you very much. Morning, John, and thank you for making it lovely jubbly. So John is the equivalent of me in the Hampshire and Isle of Wight Wildlife Trust. God, that's much harder to say than it should.
Yes, I used to just call it Hampshire, but I get a lot of jit for that. So
right, John, over to you, mate.
Okay, I'm just going to share my screen. I hope it goes okay. If it isn't working, you can't see it, do you mind giving me a shout, Tammy, and I'll
I will do.
Is that visible for everybody?
Yes, it is at the moment. You just need to go, yeah, grand, onto slideshow.
Lovely. Okay, thank you very much for inviting me along. So I just thought what I'd do, if it's okay, is outline the scheme that we've been running for a while now in Hampshire, which is a sort of nitrate mitigation scheme. It's taken a bit of getting up and going, but it's basically a change of land use scheme to mitigate for the impacts of nitrates on the Solent. And I'll just go into the background of why this scheme was needed and how we're doing it. And then if I get into too much detail, I'll apologise in advance, and you can press the red button or something and buzz me out. So my name's John Durnell. I'm Director of Estates for the Hampshire and Isle of Wight Wildlife Trust. I've been with the Trust about 24 years. Obviously arrived as a very young man indeed. and it's taken a terrible toll on me looking at me. So I shall move on. So as you all know, we're part of the Wildlife Trust movements. We're quite a large trust. We have about 100 staff and about 26,000 members. And we manage quite a lot of nature reserves, covering about 4,600 hectares. So we're quite, our sort of business model is quite a hands-on land management business model. But like every other organisation in the countryside sector, we realised that the sort of funding models we've relied on for the last 20, 30 years are looking fairly shaky. And we're also looking at sort of opportunities to deliver some of these wider nature-based solutions that I'm sure Jim was talking about earlier as well, where we need to sort of address things like water quality and climate change. So just a bit of background. So the location of the area is the Solent. The map on the right there shows the Isle of Wight and the different catchments that are impacted by the nitrates issue. And like most coastal areas, the coast of Hampshire and the island are fairly densely populated, and there's plans for fairly large scale housing development and economic growth over the next 15 years or so. So the problem of nitrates is effectively one that's been happening for many years, and it, you know, to be honest, predominantly it is an issue of agricultural runoff, and nitrate levels have been building up and causing sort of eutrophication in the Solent over many years. Probably about 80% of it is agricultural runoff, but the rest is from wastewater treatment plants. And obviously a large amount of that nitrate effectively gets fixed into the coastal waters and really raises that background level and causes some fairly significant issues of algal blooms. And you can see here on the picture on the bottom of this slide, the sort of algal mat that started to form over very large areas of intertidal mud in the Solent, and that has a fairly significant impact on a whole range of species. So it obviously impacts on bird feeding opportunities, but it also impacts on the invertebrates, on the vegetation that grows on intertidal mud, and all of these intertidal habitats are fantastically important carbon stores as well. And these mats of algae that have formed over it really are beginning to impact on the ability of these habitats to function in a reasonable way. So, you know, the silent sites, the Solent itself, which is an SPA and SAC, is sort of designated as an unfavourable condition primarily because of this issue of algal blooms and this blanket weed that is now smothering much of the mudflats. So as many of you may be aware, there was a court case in the European Court called the Dutch nitrate case or nitrogen case, and basically what the EU courts ruled was that you cannot continue to give permissions for plans or projects that cause an incremental sort of damage to the Natura 2000 sites. And Natural England looked at this, and they basically interpreted this ruling as saying that planning permissions for new residential housing developments could not be given in areas that were likely to cause detrimental impacts on the Solent unless the mitigation was in place to deal with nitrates. And they made this decision, and about a dozen local planning authorities are impacted by this decision in Hampshire and on the island. And effectively, the result of that is that very few, if any, housing permissions have been granted in the area for about the last 18 months. And South Hampshire in particular is a very high growth area. The political pressure is enormous. Natural England got under a lot of pressure from this. And so, you know, the pressure to try and find a solution has been huge. Certainly the political pressure, a lot of MPs have become involved, ministers, DEFRA is involved. And so about a year and a half ago, we decided that we would have a little punt and see if we could devise a solution on a fairly simple basis, because I am a bear of very few brains, so I didn't want to do anything too complicated. And you know, we decided that we would work with local authorities, developers, Natural England, to try and get a solution going. And actually, we're effectively the first people doing anything. And you know, if you're a wildlife trust or an NGO with a good reputation, you know, we probably underestimate how important that reputation is, and that covenant that the Wildlife Trust name gives to a scheme has been really, really important in this. The level of trust people have in us operating ethically has really helped us move forward. So basically, we're looking at a whole range of nature-based solutions, but in very simple terms, what we aim to do is acquire intensively managed agricultural land which are within the floodplain. So we're clearly, the continued intensive management of that land is going to cause nitrate pollution in the Solent. We effectively then run a zero inputs system on that site, which is, could be rewilding, could be hay meadows, it could be a woodland creation scheme. It doesn't really matter, whatever is the most appropriate land management for that area going forward. That effectively, using Natural England's methodology, provides a capacity of mitigation that we can then sell to developers or local planning authorities to fund our work. We also, because we're not, the technical legal test is neutrality. So a developer has to prove that his development is neutral. So if he's causing 5 kilograms of nitrogen pollution, technically he only has to find 5 kilograms to mitigate. Well, clearly looking at those pictures earlier, I hope you'll agree that the current situation is not acceptable. So our scheme is also looking to build in some headroom where we actually reduce the amount of nitrogen. So we take more land out of production than is required just to cause neutrality. And the numbers are a little tricky, so we can't do probably as much as we like, but we're looking to expand that amount. At the moment, we're taking 5% more out. There is some built-in headroom in the methodology as well, so probably in reality, we're removing 10 to 15% more nitrogen than is being created by the development. And obviously, what we look to do then is create new nature reserves and manage those in perpetuity. We have developed some tests for developments that we're willing to support. It's not universally popular, I can tell you, facilitating the development of housing in areas. So what we're looking to do is we will not provide nitrogen mitigation for developments that are deemed as completely unacceptable to the local planning authority. We do not want to be undermining the planning system. We all may have our concerns about the planning system, but it is at least a system. And what we don't want to see is sort of planning by appeal by large developers able to buy 500 or 600 kilograms of mitigation from us and then bring loads of developments forwards that aren't really in plan and manage to get those through because nobody else can build. So we just won't do that. We obviously don't. We screen all the applications and we don't sell where there's a large outstanding ecological objection from us or Natural England or the local ecologists. We won't support developments where there's loss of irreplaceable biodiversity. And there are a number of other mitigation schemes in place for impacts on the Solent and other things like that. And we will not, we wouldn't sell to a developer who was not making their contributions through that. And to be fair though, the local planning authorities are comfortable with our tests. We're a private company after all, we could choose to sell who we like. So we also are using this really as a bit of a stalking horse to change our relationship with some developers and see if we can encourage them to look at building with nature or biodiversity net gain. And I've got to say, it has actually really changed the relationship I think we have with some of the development community. And, that's not been a bad thing. We did quite a lot of analysis of where we'd objected to planning applications in the past. And without support from Natural England, we're basically not very successful at all in stopping development. So, what this enables us to do is possibly take a different approach where we engage with developers earlier and we try and embed biodiversity net gain and the protection of important habitats early on in a scheme rather than objecting late on and trying to see that scheme change, which has not really been very successful. So basically, there's a standard Natural England methodology. We identify the land that we are looking to secure. We then get that signed up by Natural England as being in the correct location. Natural England have a standardised mitigation level for each type of land use. So we're really only looking at arable, turkeys, chickens, pigs, or dairy. We're not really looking at low-level grazing because, as you can see, that only really delivers 13 kilograms a hectare. and there's a residual continual loss of about 5, so your net gain is only about 8 kilograms a hectare, and that doesn't really work economically for us. And then what we look to do is once we've agreed the capacity of a site, we then have to enter a Section 106 with the local authorities, and then we can sell to developers, and the funds generated will enable us to purchase further land and manage the land that we're managing at the moment. So our first site was Little Duxmoor Farm. We purchased this on the 1st of April last year. It's about 100 acres of ex-arable and poultry. Gave us a capacity, total capacity agreed with Natural England of 848 kilograms. With the headroom, that meant we were selling a little over 800. And already, just after 1 year, the site is phenomenal. It was very intensively managed, arable and maize, and it really is fabulous. It's probably in the top 2 or 3 arable weed sites on the island already. And we genuinely thought, because of the intensity of management, that wouldn't be the case, but it's already absolutely fabulous. So this has been a really good proof of concept, and we've already sold basically the whole capacity of this site to developers in the area. The process itself is quite complicated and very legally heavy. Local planning authorities are terrified of JR, so they want everything absolutely tied down. So we need to be able to provide 125 years of management. So that's either a lease, a long lease, or freehold. We have a Section 106, Section 33 agreement that underpins it. Now, this has been one of the more complicated elements because, as some of you may know, local planning authorities cannot enforce Section 106 obligations beyond their administrative boundary. So we've had to develop a hybrid agreement, which is a Section 106 of the Town and Country Planning Act and a Section 33 of the Local Government Act, which allows local authorities to delegate back and forth to different areas their enforcement powers. So basically, we don't have to have the mitigation site within the local planning authority where the development is taking place. And that's really important because we've got quite a lot of very urban local authorities, Portsmouth, Gosport, Fareham, where really there isn't that capacity for land within that local authority area. So that took quite a lot of working through, but we are now there. And then we offer the developers contracts, which we enter into with them to effectively provide this mitigation. Just quick one on the Section 106. Now, this has got to be close to the dullest slide I've ever put up in any talk, but it is really important, I think, if you're going to do this sort of thing, to think what you're committing to. If you effectively overcommit to the prohibited uses, you won't be able to enter your site into any future agri-environment agreement or look at carbon or any other stacked benefits. So what we've tried to do is make it a prohibitive use, so the things we're not allowed to do rather than the things we are allowed to do. So effectively, we can't add any fertiliser, we can't overgraze the place, we can't use it for dairy farming or commercial horticulture, and we won't plough significant areas. We can do a bit of subsoiling to allow arable weeds to continue on 10% of the area. So it's a relatively light a number of provisions that we're committing to in the legal agreement, and that allows us, and we've had discussions with Natural England on this point, to do extra things. So if we want to plant hedgerows or create wildflower meadows or plant orchards or woodlands, we still can do that because effectively our legal commitments in the Section 106 are not to chuck a load of fertiliser on it. So was quite a lot of work, but I think it's really important, if you're going to do this, to think about what you're committing to and don't overcommit to things that you don't need to. So effectively, the test is, are we reducing nitrates? And we've tried to make sure that the commitments we make are about reducing nitrogen getting into the soil rather than any broader biodiversity commitments. We may make those commitments later and for other reasons, but this does allow us potentially to secure other funding in the future. So basically, if somebody applies, they want a kilogram or whatever of mitigation, we provide a little map to the local planning authority showing where we're mitigating for that particular development. The local planning authorities will want to know that we're not overselling or double selling areas. So we have this cumulative map which shows where all of the developers are, and we provide that to local authorities on a periodic basis so they can be confident that we're not overselling or double sold any of our sort of sites. The financial model is the key, obviously, that underpins it all. We aim to acquire land at market value. At the moment, because people are aware this scheme is out there, we are probably paying a little over market, but we do want to control that. Our trustees have decided that they want to see us secure enough income to put £25,000 per hectare into a commuted sum. So, you know, you're looking at needing to secure probably 50 to 55,000 a hectare for each site, and that would allow you to buy the site or lease it for 125 years and then set aside your commuted sum. And you're looking at, so that means you probably need to charge between £2,500 and £3,000 per kilogram. And on a typical site, you're getting 23 to 26 kilograms of nitrate mitigation per hectare. So the sums work, the figures for developers, they find this acceptable and doesn't affect their viability. So that seems to be fairly well where the price is settled at the moment. We also have an admin fee to cover the mapping and instruction of solicitors, and the developer also pays any legal fees associated with setting the contracts up. So we've learned a few lessons over the last 18 months. If you're going to do it, setting the scheme up is time consuming and expensive. You need to really think that you're probably looking at close to a year from inception to being able to sell any credits. It's really quite a time consuming process, getting local authorities in particular on board. And the legal fees were quite expensive for setup. It's not universally popular in being involved as a wildlife trust with house builders, and you need to make sure you have your public messaging and your governance well documented, because we did have a complaint to the charity commissioners, which they found us to be, they completely exonerated us and said the scheme was completely acceptable. But I think if we hadn't kept our records so well, we might have been in trouble there. As I said earlier, don't overcommit through your Section 106, because that is a contract you're going to have to deliver for the next 125 years. And it's important to build relationships with Natural England and the local planning authorities, because without their cooperation, it's really, really difficult to move anything forward. We quite deliberately have not committed to taking land out of agriculture. We are running a low zero inputs agricultural system, so we will extensively graze the area. I think the message about removing land from agriculture is politically a bit toxic, and you might then run into change of use issues with planning permissions. And some of the larger developers in particular will want a long period of time to settle their account, as it were. You need to think about cash flow. It does take some time to get the funds in. But it is lucrative. It is a way of getting not only money to buy land, but also to manage it. Competition will come in. We're ahead of the curve at the moment in Hampshire, but without doubt, there are quite a few other people looking at this and beginning to come into it. The other thing I'd say is it's a huge amount of work. You know, if developers find out that you're the potential answer to their prayers, you will be phoned 10 times a day by developers wanting to have a chat. So it is a huge amount of work, and you do need to think about making some dedicated senior officer time available. We didn't do that, and frankly, it's not been the best of years for my work-life balance. So I think about, when you've got a project of this scale, thinking about actually dedicating some time to it. Yeah, we did get quite a lot of complaints. I think we've managed that pretty well. We only lost, I think, 6 or 7 members, but we had a lot of messaging up front. And, you know, as you know, when you have a vociferous local campaign, they don't always let the facts get in the way of a good story. I mean, you know, our concerns were the fact that we felt that without a solution, the HABs regs that we all value were really under threat. We just could not see the government allowing house building in, you know, very important economic areas to be suspended indefinitely. And we wanted to put together a scheme that had biodiversity at its absolute core and look to improve the situation rather than just find neutrality. And we've made those points quite vigorously in a number of fora, and broadly, I think people understand why we're doing it, but it has not been universally popular. So if you decide to do it, be ready for the backlash. We're now looking at a number of other sites. We've just agreed terms to take on the Nunwell Estate, which is about 350 acres, which we will rewild of a very intensive arable on the island. And so we are now looking to scale that up and move possibly to have 3 or 4 sites around the 2 counties over the next 18 months. But ultimately, it's got to be about wildlife. I think we must never lose sight of the fact that we're not a charity that's about helping house builders build their houses. We're a charity about rebuilding wildlife. And I think this is, you know, our business model, I suppose, traditionally has been to take areas of high wildlife value and manage them a bit better and look after them. And that gives us an incremental improvement in wildlife. You know, what we've seen from taking land that's basically knackered and very, very intensively managed and start to manage that with wildlife in mind is that the increase in wildlife is phenomenal. It really is a step change in the amount of wildlife you can get in an area, and you know, that is the focus. That's why we do it, and I think it's really important with whatever messaging we do is that, you know, we do it for wildlife, and that's the sole reason that we're involved in this. If there was no wildlife gain, we certainly would not be involved in this sort of project. So in summary, yeah, we're looking to deliver significant wildlife benefits in perpetuity. We're looking to see a reduction in the impact of nitrogen and nitrates on the solent, and we want to demonstrate that nature-based solutions can influence sustainable development. So there we go. That's us. If you've got any queries, I'm quite happy to take questions later, and I'll hand you back to the chair.
Great, thanks, John. That's super. And I'm glad to see James is with us. We'll come back to the Q&A panel at 11:25, if that's okay.
Yeah, no problem at all. I will be in for that.
Great, thanks, John. Morning, James. Nice to see you.
Apologies for me joining you late. We were just with HSBC have commissioned a study from UCL on how to get agriculture towards net zero, and they've asked me to do it. So apologies, I was slightly late on that one. So yeah.
You always are with your finger on the pulse, James. So James is joining us from Polybell Farms. Basically, I am publicly going to thank James for helping me recruit Joe and Beth, who are the 2 ELMS test officers. James gave his, along with Janice from Nottingham Wildlife Trust, they sat on the interview panel with me as 2 types of land managers, just so everybody's aware. So over to you, James, and I'll let you know if the screen shares come up, mate.
Hopefully, Tammy, that's that.
Yep, that is showing wonderfully. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. So what I'm going to do is just give you a quick introduction to the farm and who we are, what we do, and then talk about some of the projects we're looking at and some of the areas which we feel are opportunities for the Humberhead levels. So as Tammy mentioned, we farm up here, it's Polybell, and I'm also working with Tammy down in South Lincolnshire as well on her other trials. But Polybell's 5,000 acres, split in North Lincolnshire, South Yorkshire and Nottinghamshire. So we look at all 3 camps here. What we do in simple terms is, if you imagine a Sunday lunch, that's what we produce on the farm here. So it's a sustainable organic rotation of grass clover lathes with grazing livestock. So we've got sheep and dairy cows. We're also introducing pigs as well, which we'll come on to. Arable crops for animal feed, brassicas, so broccoli, collie, cabbages, alliums, leeks and onions, legumes, so field beans again for field veg, and then roots, so carrots, potatoes. The thing this farm has is with our extensive irrigation and peat and sandy soils, it's really good for high value veg production. And one of the things just to mention straight off, this lowland peat, of which the Humberhead levels is one bit, there's the Cambridgeshire Fens, Somerset levels, Manchester Mosses, but it's really high value productive farmland. A third of all UK fresh produce is grown here, and that has a UK GVA of about 3 billion. So it's you know, a really important food producing area, which not everyone knows about. Everyone thinks of Lincolnshire, but it's also up to here as well. Livestock, as I mentioned, we've introduced dairy. We finish lambs with our own breeding flock. We're introducing a beef unit because we've got a number of triple SIs and areas which we don't want to be in a arable rotation, which we want to graze. So we're looking at introducing a beef unit, and then we are introducing pigs as well. Interestingly, those are destined for the US market. They are antibiotic-free organic pork. So understanding what we do, I mean, one of the big things as an organic farmer, we're always being sold the potential of, you know, beneficial insects, biocontrol. So what we actually wanted to understand before we jumped into this, what do we have? So we commissioned an independent invertebrate study across the field margins, and it's absolutely fascinating to see the different types of insects that we have in those margins. So we have some 70 kilometers of margins made up of bumblebird, pollen and nectar, and wild bird seed mixes. And these are effectively the way we control pests in our crops. So beneficials are a hugely important part of it. There's then also the nutrient management system, because in really simple terms, if I'm buying nutrient or paying to put it on the land, I don't want it to end up, I want to end up in my crop, not in field. So how do I circulate those nutrients? That's where the green manures and fertility builds come in, and the grass overlays. And then we've got some new projects such as wetlands corridors, which I'll come on to, and that's working with Notts Wildlife Trust, Links Wildlife Trust, and Severn Trent to across the sort of Idle and Torn valleys, you know, have been very kind in helping fund some of these projects. So we've got 100 hectares in total. We're in a mid-tier countryside stewardship scheme. We do have 3 triple SIs are under our management, and we've got another 3 which are on our boundary, one of which is Notts Wildlife Trust and 2 are Links Wildlife Trust. I think the bit which I'd say to all farmers who are listening is the value of measuring things. I mean, so we've measured 186 species of bird on the farm. Actually, there are lots of volunteers out there who will come and measure stuff for you. And I know Tammy would help you, put you in contact with those, and as with Janice from Notts Wildlife Trust. And it's hugely valuable when you're talking to customers and talking to your local communities to be able to show them what is here and how your management improves that is a really useful tool, and something which we want to include, I'd suggest, as an opportunity in the ELMS. That whole management piece, actually that whole measurement piece, is a really important bit. Just say in 2011, we did a low carbon farming study with the Soil Association and used the simple toolkits. And what we were able to do is identify the areas where we were creating carbon emissions. And the really simple bit is anything that's really creating a carbon emission on the farm is probably costing you money as a farmer. So if you reduce it, you tend to reduce your emissions. So we use a lot of electricity for chilling vegetables for the pack house. So we installed the floating solar. And the idea here was I didn't want to lose land for solar panels, so we floated them on top of one of our farm reservoirs. And we also installed wind turbine. We're in a big flat open area, so that was something. But what we've done is it's gone for a slightly smaller one rather than the really big turbines. And this is all part of making the farm more profitable and also making it, reducing its carbon emissions, therefore making it sustainably both financially and environmentally. Just some of the future things which we're doing, and Tammy knows that we quite like the crazy and that sort of our place. We founded an agri-tech business which is trying to take farming down to the individual plant level. And the idea here is really simple, that if you really understand which bits of your fields are making you money, which plants are making you money, then don't keep growing crops on the bits that aren't making you money. Use those for environmental benefit. Use those to benefit the rest of your crops, so such as beneficial insects, create a habitat for that. It will have a wider environmental benefit and it will make you more profitable. And as an organic farmer, obviously weeds are a really big problem. We have this challenge between tillage, which is what we do a lot of organically to kill weeds, and so therefore we've managed to patent a light weeder which kills weeds with lights. We're also looking at how we can encourage more people onto the farm, and this then goes hand in hand with how the farm looks, you know, the environment we can establish. It enables us to potentially access other income streams. We bought a little local shop which was all about selling our products locally. And then we're looking at a bioenergy carbon capture and storage, which, you know, this area in the Humberhead levels, there's lots of potential for energy and for looking at big industrial users along the Humber. How can we provide them with energy and at the same time enhance the environment? So one project which is ongoing, and unfortunately this was a slight COVID casualty, but it was meant to start at the end of 2019 and it started now, but anyway, we are now underway. What we are looking at here, so as I mentioned at the start, an organic farm with a rotation. That rotation includes things like grass overlays, but we were looking to see what if we could introduce a piece to the rotation where we could allow land to be temporarily flooded. And the idea is to bring together, obviously, farm management, habitat creation, and water management. And can we therefore create a temporary wetland which would provide a space for peak floodwaters? So you can see on this little photo, we've got 4 5-hectare trials, and they're bunded round the outside. And the idea is that if you have a large area of land, but just a small height of water, you can actually store a lot of volume. And obviously as well, if we were to allow this to wet, it'd be a fantastic habitat for wintering waders. And can I, as a farm, use this as a tool to kill pest and disease in my soil? Can we potentially lay down additional sediment from the flooding and in the old style of warping, and the impact then as well on, does wetting the peat, even if temporarily, reduce the emission from it? So we're starting this now and we will shortly be doing it. It's been a little bit of a challenge because we are in a priority catchment here, which has a closed catchment. So using water, which we've got a spray irrigation licenses for a different project, has certainly challenged the Environment Agency and how we can do it. But luckily they've been able to help us through that maze. And we will shortly be re-wetting it and looking at that. So University of York have been taking samples of and looking at things like worm density, but also soil samples and looking at pest and disease. So it's absolutely fascinating. But again, this is the sort of thing whereby if farmers were working together, potentially I could say, I'm not growing a winter crop in this area of my farm this year, so I could allow that to flood over winter, and it's not really going to potentially damage my profitability. And in fact, maybe there could be a payment for providing this, and we rotate that round. So it's not just the same place every year. we actually use it as a rotational method, something which I haven't seen done anywhere, but I think has real potential. The other big bit which we're looking at the moment is around the peatland. So that is absolutely crucial to this Humberhead Levels area. The 418,000 hectares of lowland peat, which is drained for agriculture, which is about 90% of the UK's lowland peat, is responsible for 3% of the UK greenhouse gas emissions. Now, you can look at that as a real problem, or you can say that's the opportunity where we can lead the area here, lead the way here as to how we can change our management. So the first thing which we're doing, and I apologise for the bad photo, but the Flux Tower here, which it has to be in the middle of the field, and it's got 120 acres around it, so that we know that all we are measuring is what is it. So what this does is it measures the greenhouse gases coming down from the atmosphere and the greenhouse gases going up from the land. So you're basically measuring the flux between the two. We know how much is in the crop because when we go to harvest it, and therefore we will be able to measure the net gain or loss from this particular management. And at the moment, the farming on drained deep peat is up to 35 tonnes of CO2 per hectare per year, and on wasted or skirt peat or drained peat, it depends. Lots of different people have different phrases for it. It's 15 to 25 tonnes of carbon per hectare per year. So I do think that this is going to be one of the big areas that we've got potential to look at. And before we jump in and start suggesting we want to do something, we thought it was really important to actually measure it. So that just brings me on to some thoughts for the area. Water has to be one of the really big ones. So the idle and torn catchments, which is where, so our farm is between the idle and the torn, so we're right in that, and at the sort of end of it, but it's one of the priority catchments. We've had both flooding and water storage. So in November 19, we had land flooded, which is where the dairy is. And then in May 20, we received a drought notice that they were going to turn off irrigation licenses. In the meantime, millions of pounds have been spent pumping water out to sea. So how we manage water in this whole area, and I know that both Janice and Tammy, with the reserves they have and the triple SIs which are on our boundaries, it's how do they keep them wetter is one of the big, and water management's a really big thing. So there's lots of potential there to look at water management. As I've also mentioned is carbon, and the DEFRA's Lowland Peat Task Force is looking at lots of potential options. And this is a spectrum, and I don't think we want to, farmers shouldn't be scared of the fact that, this isn't about restoring everything to a sort of pre-Vermeulen 400 years ago scenario, and that there's no room for farming. There are things that can be done, and it's looking at that spectrum of agricultural practices and thinking about where those agricultural practices not only benefit the environment but also improve the productivity of the farm, and make you as the farmer more money and more profitable and more sustainable. And the final bit is as well the biodiversity side, because there is huge potential. I know I'm biased living in this area, so it is a unique landscape. This big open area has huge potential, and the sort of analogy I would use is we've all sort of seen from COVID that when we all act together, the small actions of the individual can have a huge impact. And the same is very true in the environment, that not one farmer, one land manager, one council, one agency can actually make the change. But if we all make smaller changes and work together, the cumulative impact of those changes are going to be quite massive. So rather than me carrying on talking, I think it's probably best if I stop now and then answer more time in the question and answer session. So Tammy, back over to you if that's Okay.
Thank you, James. Right then, I'm sure John will rejoin us shortly. As I say, he's in the middle of a senior management team, so I've been very blessed that his boss allowed him to dip in and out of that to help us out this morning. So, well, I don't really need to say anything from now on. I think you've all done a brilliant job. But here we go. We do have some questions, so please feel free to put them in the Q&A or the chat. I'll look at both and we'll get to asking them. So Miles Drury has asked, and I think this is aimed at you, Jim, basically, where does he find the yield mapping tool that you illustrated in your presentation, and how well does it correlate with known data such as topography, soils, and the agricultural land classes of grading land?
Yeah, so thanks for that one, Miles. It actually correlates quite closely. Part of the soil system and service that we offer to farmers, we actually, for many of them, we classify their soil type. So we look at their soil type, we then look at their nutrient values, and very much like James was talking about, we'll take them through the process of how can you improve it, what can you do, and then you get to the point where there are blocks of land where the soil just doesn't want you to get the yield and return. So it does correlate. We're in the early days of tying it back to environmental management and using the system that way. It's a system that was originally designed to do the production enhancement stuff. So yeah, it does correlate.
Jim, I apologize, I missed your talk earlier on, but we use the soil system for our precision farming, and it then very naturally fed into, as you say, the areas that you do see areas of the farm, and every farmer knows it. There's a bit of that, there's that corner of that field that no matter what you do, and all this is doing is then showing the gradient between the bit which you know definitely isn't going to produce, and so therefore you would naturally draw your own map of. But then there are other bits, there's a gradient away from it. So how wide should that strip be? How big should that field corner really, you know, what bits are, and therefore that then gives you the opportunity to change them, what you use that bit for. And the best bit about it is that not only does it benefit the environment, it benefits the productivity and pocket of you as the farmer. So
you've just repeated my talk for me, James. Thank you very much for that.
Sorry, Jim.
No, it's all right. It's nice to see it linked.
Jim, you spoke about the LENS landscape, I can't remember, landscape enhancement network scheme.
Yes.
I know some of the water companies are involved with it because Anglian Water spoke to me about it. The question is, are the commercial enterprises interested in buying natural capital assets? And is that why they're investing in the scheme?
So it's a bit of an unstable network at the minute, Tammy. I think I got that question. They are, in a way, buying natural capital assets. What they've done in the project we're involved in, they've developed between them a list of measures. I'll turn my camera off. Just going to turn my camera off. They've developed a list of measures that they want farmers to deliver, and that does correspond to some natural capital measures. It's things like cover cropping. It's things like areas of land for pollinators, so improving soils. So in a roundabout way, they are paying for natural capital through that system.
Grand, thanks. Mike touched on, well, basically it's more of a comment really. When I raised the peri-urban areas earlier, he was saying this is the place to win hearts and minds in regards to the wider public, to engage the public, and that they'll be critical going forwards in regards to the environmental land management scheme area. Now, Are there any other questions, people? I don't know. They're not popping up for me. Joe, if you can see any, or Beth, do let me know. I have a question for each of you. I have one directly to John and then a joint question. How did you, when you spoke about, so on behalf of Greater Lincolnshire, I've applied for all the local planning authorities and the nature partnerships and our local enterprise partnerships. And I got a lot of support from local land managers, farmers. We have applied for the Natural Environment Investment Ready Fund to look at the legal mechanisms for setting up that trade platform you were talking about.
Yeah.
I'm interested, on the fact that you said you've had no life-work balance in the last year, so I'm starting to think, oh dear. But secondly, the solicitor element.
Yeah.
And working with legal processes, how much knowledge did you need, or the people, your partners you were working with, or did the legal people just get what you wanted and manage to find their way through? That's
a really good question. I think we were lucky in two aspects. Is one of the partners in the firm we just have as our solicitors had started getting involved in this because other clients were coming to him talking. So he had a sort of rudimentary understanding of the nitrates issue, and they've sort of learned as they've gone along, really, and it's all been fairly bespoke. The other thing we were lucky with, the lead solicitor for the main local authority who decided to invest some time into this was really good, actually, and she was very savvy, and they work quite closely together to get the legal agreements. But the thing about solicitors is you need to understand, you need to make sure you instruct them well. So, you know, ultimately you're going to be making those decisions, and they'll tell you whether that will stick legally. So I think it's really important to have a good solicitor, particularly when you're trying to devise that section 106. And that was really a partnership between us and our solicitors and the solicitors from the key planning authority. And I'm hoping that we can then use that section 106 across all planning authorities, but they've all got different lawyers who want to be paid, so they do tend to all have a different view. You know, you get 12 lawyers in a room, you've got 13 opinions. So, you know, that can be quite tricky. But yeah, I think putting a lot of dedicated time into that and really understanding what you want and how it's going to be structured. But we were lucky, I think. They were pretty good. The local planning authorities, I think, have been the slowest element. The legal advice for local planning authorities have been the slowest element, trying to get that partnership together. And, you know, our solicitors were very good at saying to me, you may well want this to happen in 2 months' time, John, but it just isn't. It's just not, they just will not, you know. And so we're in a situation where we have in principle agreement with local planning authority to sign our section 106, and it's taken them 3 months or 4 months to sign it. So, you know, I think they can be really quite painfully slow in getting those things over the line. So yeah, I think you need to know what you want out of it, and then instruct the solicitors, give them a decent heads of terms, and then let them deal with all the technical rubbish, because I'm not okay. A solicitor.
Grand. Louise has asked a question about the nitrate credit process. How did you manage the land before the credit was bought?
That's a really good question, actually. So we Natural England's test is what the average land use had been for the previous 10 years. So you don't need to worry if you're buying, say you buy the land and there's a lag in selling of, you know, 6 months, 8 months. That's not really a problem, because that's not really going to affect the average land use. So if the average land use over the past 10 years have been arable, then Natural England will accept that's arable, and the predominant land use is still arable for quite a period of time. The key thing about our section 106 agreement is, although we enter this global section 106, which enters the whole site in, our legal obligations to manage it in this zero inputs way only come into force on the patches we've sold. So in theory, we could take the areas not sold and put them back into intensive agriculture. It's probably not what the trust's going to do. Or we could even sell that patch off to a neighbouring farmer to continue using it. So it's the average land use over the previous 10 years. So basically, as soon as we get it, we stop farming it intensively. But with the much larger site, this 350 acres, we're licensing the current tenant to continue farming that at least till September and take the standing crop, because we don't want to penalise him. We don't want a standing crop, if I'm honest. It's not what we do. So we're going to allow him to keep doing that until September. And it may be that if there's a lag, we can continue to farm some other areas there until that comes forward, depending on demand.
Great. So I've got a question. Oh, one's just come in. If somebody wanted to start a scheme such as John's, where is the best place to start?
The best place to start, I would say, is where Natural England have told the local planning authorities they can't give planning permissions. The Somerset levels is come into that because I think of phosphates rather than nitrates. Phosphates are quite different, but this is going to become an increasing issue. I think Herefordshire's got an issue on nitrates. Kent's got some issues. I think we're going to see this as an issue that begins to hamper the ability of the planning system to operate in more places. So if you're going to start anywhere, you need the driver. People may morally want to reduce inputs into watercourses and things, but there needs to be an economic model that allows the landowners to make a return, and for us to, or whoever does it, to make a return to run the scheme. So, look for where that policy driver is really, and that's where you can target. I think it's not going to work in a vacuum. Okay, grand.
So I'm going to put on a I'm not Tammy Smalley, head of conservation hat. And I'm going to say I am a farmer in the Humberhead levels. Life is quite uncertain at the moment in regards to which way I should take my business. So, Jim Egan, what would your top tip be for me? Remembering that ultimately we want wildlife, we want good ecosystem services, but we also want British food. What is your top tip for me as a lady farmer in the Humberhead levels for the next few years?
Okay, it's one tip. It's stand back, look at your farm with a different pair of eyes, and be really, really honest about the areas that are currently making you money and the areas that aren't. And at the same time, look at the profitability of your rotation and cropping and be completely honest. And it's hard. It's really, really, really hard. You're going to find it difficult, but I'm going to bet you, and I'll bet you Kit Kat, that you'll find at least 10% of the farm that you know in your heart of hearts you shouldn't be farming. And when you've done that, come back and we'll talk about what you can do next.
So I'm going to come to you and James and John, but Jim, when you bet in with me, it's always about the tunnels. There we go.
Okay, but it was only one tip I gave you. I didn't go on forever.
James, how would you answer my question?
Well, I'd actually answer it as Jim was saying, and I think the bit is that if you say sometimes you're not the most objective person to look at your own farm, you might have a neighbour who you can talk to, who you can actually be open and honest, or someone from a bit further afield, because they need you to help them look at theirs. And it is this problem that you're so wrapped up in the day job of what you're doing that you miss the obvious bits. And there is lots of advice out there, but the first thing is measurement, because if you can't measure something, you can't manage it. And whether that's as Jim mentioned, that the top line profitability, and there's lots of things that go into that. But start on, you know, what is making me money? What is actually the driver? You know, I know in the past that obviously subsidies were linked to production of food, and that has had a tail into the idea that the more you produce, the more profitable you are, because that was a historic truth. It's not the truth anymore. That won't be the direction of travel. So start looking at it, and whether the measurement is simply, say, the top line profitability, but also think about things like do an online carbon toolkit and look at the things there that actually are contributing to your carbon footprint. There'll be things like electricity. Is there a role for on-farm renewables? You know, what's your profile of use? Is there a technology out there that works? Diesel use. Well, actually, when you replace that next tractor or bit of kit, really understand that you get the right power to what you want to do, and also that you've looked at the one which really works for your farm and the usage, because there's a huge difference. We've found changing the colour of our tractor fleet has saved 30% of our diesel use. Well, those tractors are slightly more expensive, but it saved us a lot of money, and it's understanding these things. So agree with Jim, really. You've got to measure things and look at it objectively and be honest with yourself. Use the different family members, use other neighbours, use the advisors who are out there, you know, and start to see. And then when you've got that map, what you can then move on to do is to say, well, potentially that area of the farm would be better used for this. And then what I can do is effectively maximise the production in the areas that can be maximised and maximise the environmental benefit in those other parts.
Grand. And John?
Yeah, I suppose to echo Jim and James's point, I think there's a term that says confront the brutal truth, and I think with farming going forward, it's important to look at that honestly and confront what's coming. You know, we had a really good talk by a large arable farmer large for down here, about 800 acres under management, and without BPS, you know, with BPS he's making a few quid, and without BPS they're losing a few quid. Now that's the brutal truth of it. So you need to look at, you know, as James says, what you can do to save money. So I think don't put your head in the sand basically and confront what's coming. The other thing I wonder whether it's worth thinking about is, you know, with ELMS coming in 24, 25, possibly start thinking about what information it would be useful to collect that would help inform and support an application to a new agri-environment scheme if you're going to do something slightly differently. You know, if you're looking for a overwintering wader option, if that's one of the options that's possible, you know, you're going to need data to support those type of applications. So if you think your farm might be suitable for that type of thing, start thinking about what sort of information might be useful to support an application going forward.
Grand. And the last question I'm going to tackle is, just mindful of time, is do any of you have any thoughts about deer management on the Humberheads and the aspirations for ELMS? It could be deer management anywhere, to be honest, but obviously we're talking about the Humberheads.
Well, we've got too many deer everywhere, if I'm honest. So I think, again, you know, it's got to be a coordinated across borders, cross tenure scheme. I don't know the Humberheads. You know, the deer initiative is a good thing. You need to set up a multi-landowner, multi-agency approach to deer. You know, we cull about 110 on one of our nature reserves, but people don't cull a lot over the boundary. So in season they hop over the boundary, and out of season they hop back. You know, it doesn't. So yeah, strategic is all I would say.
James and Jim?
I just agree with that it is, as you say, that it again, wildlife doesn't know the land boundaries. You know, it doesn't. They're not great at reading the fact of where they're. So it would echo that entirely. And that just goes to all, to be fair, beyond deer, but everything that the collaborative approach, you trying to do something which is different to your neighbour, is the source of a convert. Actually, before you start trying to do that, engage with the wider area, which is hopefully what Tammy, this whole process will enable us to do, and that farmers can, it's an open invite to everyone to get involved, because the more people that get involved, the more views that are heard, the more ideas, the easier it is to come up with suggestions that are relevant to this area and relevant to the other areas.
And Jim, finally.
I think I'll just pick up on what James has said. It's that collaborative bit. It's deer management is indicative of people coming together to deliver lots and lots of different things. And it's no good one person doing it in isolation. You've got to all agree, have an approach and deal with it. And I think nearly everything we've spoken about today just should take that approach. It's not easy. In no way. Partnership's the hardest thing you ever do, because everybody wants their logo on the front and biggest. But it's actually the most important thing when you're talking about all the things we've chatted today. So it might be deer management, but for me, it's about partnership working, recognise what others want and dealing with it together.
Yeah.
So it's my job to say, I don't know about everybody else in the audience, but I've certainly learned a lot this morning. I've found it quite aspirational from all angles, from all of you. So thank you for giving us your time today, and you're most welcome to stay on whilst I introduce what we're actually going to do, hope to do, based on the fact that so far we've had a world pandemic that's slowed it down already, hope to do over the coming year. Thanks, guys. Much appreciated.
Thanks.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Right, folks. Oh, no, that's not the button I meant to push. Here we go. Can somebody tell me if that is viewable? Can you see that, Beth or Joe?
Yeah.
Grand, perfect. Right, so we have secured a environmental land management scheme test for the Humberhead levels. Oh. Whoop. So, obviously, to give a bit of context, the environmental land management scheme is going to be phased in over the coming 7 years. You can still apply for countryside stewardship presently. The hope is that Tier 1, the Sustainable Farm Initiative, which pilots will start for this year, will be open to all applicants from 2022, and that Tier 2, which is local nature recovery, and Tier 3, which is landscape recovery, will be open to application from 2024-5. The aim of the tests and trials is DEFRA want to understand what will work best for people while still delivering climate and environmental outcomes. So this is about a co-design process. I'm also going to say the RAF boys and girls at Coningsby are currently flying around, so I do apologise if you end up hearing a jet in the background, but there's not a lot I can do about that. So what DEFRA are willing, or the government are saying, is basically you will deliver public goods for public money, and there are 6 within these. They are set out as 6 themes and outcomes that want to be achieved. So clean and plentiful water, clean air, protection from mitigation of environmental hazards. So this is things like flooding and drought. Mitigation of and adaptation to climate change. Thriving plants and wildlife. Beauty, heritage, and engagement with the public. These are the outcomes. there are multiple ways of delivering land management to get these outcomes. Jim gave a brilliant presentation on natural capital. So it is about the assets you have on your land, the services that they can deliver, which will deliver societal benefits. As I mentioned, there are 3 tiers. This test was, although there is currently open a tests and trials window for application of landscape recovery, this application actually went in as a landscape scale approach to environmental land management. And it talks about nature recovery networks in the project proposal. So we will be looking at tier 2 and 3 and mechanisms around that. So there was phase 1 applications for tests and trials. This was a phase 2 application for tests and trials. And under phase 2, there is an annex, and there's a whole series of questions that DEFRA set out around 6 themes. So land management plans, role of advice and guidance, how to spatially prioritise, so that's to do with your landscape scale and local nature recovery networks, how to enable collaboration across boundaries, what payments will deliver what outcomes, and how can you mechanise that process, maybe through stacking and other things against other investors and people who may be willing to pay for the public goods, and how we can innovate around all of that. So that is to do with the reverse auctions, bringing in other investors. You will have received information on Annex A in the information pack that came out in regards to this event. So Lincolnshire Wildlife Trust applied for 2 under phase 2 tests, both on behalf of partnerships. So we have one down in the Fens in South Lincolnshire, which is on behalf of the South Lincolnshire Water Partnership. And here we have it on behalf of the Humberhead Levels Partnership. Excuse me. Both are looking at landscape approach and working together with people. So the Humberhead Levels application was based on the National Character Area 39. I know this isn't a great image, you can't see the very details, but basically this illustrates it is in South Yorkshire, Nottinghamshire and Lincolnshire. It is working across the administrative boundaries. And again, we included a map of this within the information pack that was sent out. So the headliners, what are we going to be trying to do? Well, in the 3 interactive sessions that we have, they're all the same, so you only have to attend one. We were just trying to enable flexibility in regards to timelines. Basically, we want to get people's understanding of public goods, what they would prioritise in the Humberhead Levels, how we're going to work together collectively, potentially to deliver them. Through that process, we are hoping that we'll start to identify cluster areas. So clusters based around peri-urban. So sorry about the terminology, but that basically means on the edge of towns and cities. Buffering the core, this is me writing in short, but if you think about, we have the Humberhead Levels national nature reserves that are all peatland. If you are a land manager around there, it's about buffering those core nature sites, looking to enable better management on those sites. And then out in what I'm calling the open farmland, where we can connect the peri-urban through to these core nature sites through the whole landscape. We're hoping through these clusters to work with individual land managers, where we'll start to develop basically an outline land management plan. What evidence do we require? What advice is required? We'll be having those discussions and using those 30 management plans. We will be able to, and this may be me wishing beyond wish, but anyway, my theory was, and speaking with those on the steering groups, is you'll be able to then extrapolate from those basically information to see what a costed natural capital assessment might be for the whole of the Humberhead levels, so that we can say to DEFRA, if you were going to deliver these natural capital outcomes, these public goods across the whole of the Humberhead levels, this is basically what's available, what it may or may not cost. And we're going to have conversations with other sectors in that. So stage one, we're in it now. Thank you again, James and Janice, for sitting on the recruitment panel. We have employed the basic test coordinator for us all, but I am going to say we are not experts in everything. So we have set up a steering group of technical people from the Humberhead Levels Partnership, and also we're engaging with the University of Lincoln, the Lincoln Institute of Agriculture and Technology. So we've got various lecturers and science people feeding in from that area. We're going to be working with the environmental record centres for the 3 counties to gather evidence to underpin those land management plans. So there's various work going on and technical specialists to support us all. We're going to engage with you from these sort of cluster areas. And this is the first step in that process, the workshop that we're having today and tomorrow. And then we're going to advertise a fair and open, transparent application process, because I realise as delivering outline management plans for landowners needs to be fair and equitable. You all deserve to have a chance of being involved in that. We will have initial one-to-one conversations with land managers from across the whole of the Humberhead levels. So if you're willing to talk to us to gather information, that'll be great. This is beyond just the 30 land management plans. We want to think about big topics. What public goods on your land? What are the barriers to you delivering those public goods? Are they just the barriers on your land, or are there policy barriers? Is there evidence and data barriers? Is there a knowledge barrier? So we can gather that understanding and start to build what a land management plan package might look like, and what support people will need to deliver those, to be able to then apply to the ELMS scheme in the future. We'll use all of this information to basically then identify through the application process as well, the land holdings we're going to work with in the specific geographical clusters. And we're hoping those clusters will, because DEFRA have asked us to focus on peri-urban, and we are going to also focus on the open farmland and buffering core nature conservation sites. We'll use these, as I said, to these 30 plans to help us deliver some sort of report on what ELMS and a natural capital approach will be for the Humberhead levels. This will be version 1, edition 1 of the report. We're going to use this to then go and talk to other potential investors in those public goods and those natural capital goods. So we would, for instance, talk to the water companies, talk to the industries on the Humber who may be interested in carbon and have conversations with them about, would they be interested in buying these goods? How would they see that working? What would they consider paying for those goods? We'll then bring all of that information, and you never know, we might be able to deliver this face-to-face, because this workshop was supposed to be delivered face-to-face, but we live in a world where it had to happen virtually. But this symposium will be next year, so maybe if we've all been vaccinated, it can happen face-to-face, where we all come together, we look at the second version of that report after we've had the input from the other potential investors, and we build yet more consensus about what's important for the Humberhead levels. We use that last amount of input to finalise the report to DEFRA. So the next steps for you, well, there are 3 sessions where we're going to be asking questions. This is about opening up the discussions over today and tomorrow. There's session today at 3 till 5, then one in the morning tomorrow from 8 till 10, and then one in the early evening tomorrow from 5 till 7. I totally understand this is a busy time in the farming calendar. Unfortunately, COVID has played its part, which is why we're also offering different time slots to try and enable those people. Once we've gone through the initial stages and we've identified clusters that would be potentially interested in developing, then we'll open up the application process. So you'll be able to apply to be involved. We may send out surveys. These will be simple because I, like John, am a simple bear. And I'm also dyslexic, so there'll be generally no big words. In fact, symposium is pushing it for me. That's quite a big word. And it has lots of upsy downsy letters. Joe, Beth or I, and we do have a 3rd officer joining us, Emma, in July, may ring for a chat because sometimes we don't always understand what people write down. What I want from you is to understand. I know the Humberhead levels is important for food production. But coming back to what all of our 3 panelists said, I want you to be open with us to look to build more resilient places for wildlife, to protect soils, and basically improve water across the Humberhead levels and how we manage it. Because we go from boom to bust all the time, too much, too little. Can we together achieve more? And all of that will lead to more integrated pest management, soil management, and water management. I also feel it is important, and James touched on this, monitoring, setting a baseline what you have now, and then monitoring the change over time. And there are various groups who will help you do that. And here's a really important thing. Land management in this country needs to be celebrated as we go towards making great British food, delivering great British water, and great British wildlife recovery. You do not have to be an expert in everything, and I certainly am not. And therefore, do not feel alone. These are uncertain times, and together I think we can find the path through. So I want to thank you for your time today. It is precious to give it. I want to thank you in advance for engaging with us over the coming year. And I want to thank the panelists who have done a fantastic job. And to all of you, have a good day. I hope to see you on the interactive sessions or further down the path for the Humberhead levels test. Good on you. Have a good day. Take care.